Parenting's easy. Everything just becomes more effective and easier, but it's not until I delight.
Right.
It's not until I delight with her until I get my truth about this.
Right. Where men are, the marketing for, hey, stop by, have a drink, and enjoy what you get to see there is there. So the marketing is definitely there.
Visually, we're being stimulated.
Right.
As soon as we get up.
Yeah.
Right.
As soon as we're 7 years old, 5 years old, we're visually stimulated.
All right, let's do it. Episode 5 of the Altered Manhood Podcast. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show. We are going to be jumping into a topic today that is important for all of Christendom, in my opinion, but especially for men, and that is cultural sexuality. Now, before you hit next and don't listen to this episode on the podcast, what we're not going to do is we're not going to go ahead and talk about the normal, hey, here's what the Bible says about, cultural sexuality, and here's what you're supposed to do, here's what you're not supposed to do. We want to enter the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is my experience in men's ministry is that men don't even understand for the majority of that the enemy is using their testosterone against them. Wow. And what I mean by that, I know we're going to come out shooting here, Ralph, sorry, buddy, that the world is set up in such a way to be able to try to shackle you with your testosterone, not make you free. God never intended that. His intention was you to have testosterone for purposes not just procreation, but for the purpose of doing things according to His will when it comes to sexuality. So the first thing I want to jump in, guys, and get your opinion on is, what does this look like nowadays for men, right? We all just shared before we even get started today our ages, right? So 41, you're what, Ralph?
I'm the old man. I'm 53.
You're 53, and Jerry is...
I'm getting up there, man. Yeah. 57.
57. Yeah. So here, we have now a diverse... I grew up in the internet age. Right. The internet was coming along when I came. You guys are, ahead of me, so it was kind of later on for you.
Right.
But that wrecked this idea of all these things that are toxic for men to be able to get their hands on. Now it was just incredibly easy, right? But I think that a lot of men are smartening up to the cheapness of it all. Right? That it's the emptiness, that it's fake, that it's not wholesome, right? Mm-hmm. So what I want to first do is jump into, okay, how are men that are, especially men listening to this podcast, whether you're just a believer or whether or not you're just stumbled upon this thing, how is culture targeting these guys? How are culture targeting the men today to be able to use their testosterone, use their sexuality against them? Because I don't think we talk about it much. I think it's just something that, here's how I'm made, here's what I'm supposed to do. No, you're actually being targeted for destruction. Right? John 10:10, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, I've come that you may have life and have it abundantly. What do you got, Ralph?
I do think that, it's just marketing towards men, right? Mm-hmm. You look at the NFL, for example, right? Every commercial is either targeted towards the sexuality or, drinking and how fun it is. Mm-hmm. And, girls, wearing less than, appropriate clothing or what have you saying, but it's a sex charged culture. And even here, that's, we are here in Tampa. So around the stadium are a bunch of strip clubs.
Yeah, so true.
Right?
Right down Dale
So everything's, where men are, the marketing for, hey, stop by, have a drink, and enjoy what you get to see there is there. So the marketing is definitely there. And look at your algorithm, on your social media.
Oh, for sure.
What are the things that continue to pop up and what's trying to get your attention as a man? We're definitely being targeted. And here's the thing, because men are what we see, right? Like I don't need maps very often because I'm visually driven. Like I remember landmarks when I'm driving. And there's some things that I can't remove out of my mind that I've seen when I was growing up, when it came to porn or, certain women and certain things. Like it's hard because men are visually driven. And so the entertainment industry understands that.
They do.
Right? And so, men are being targeted. What do you think, Jerry?
I'm right on the same point. This is a topic, Tim, where, man, it's one of those that you wish you can go back because I didn't know I was a target.
Yeah.
Many men don't. And it's something that, man, me specifically have failed in responding the right way.
Yeah.
Yep.
But just want to encourage you, it's not how you start, it's how you end.
Yeah.
Right.
God has redemption.
Yeah.
God has grace and love. And this is coming from an awareness of like, hey, this is the world we live in. How do we respond to this broken world? And I do agree. I was watching an NBA game with my grandson, and I had to talk to him about Viagra, gambling, and all these topics that I'm just sometimes not. I wasn't prepared. I'm talking about Steph Curry, and we're looking at who's getting traded. But man, it's just he's getting bombarded with all these messages of like, hey, there's something wrong with you, and this is how you fix it.
Yep.
Wow.
The marketing is going after a need that we all have. We all crave intimacy and being in community. There's a healthy pursuit of that, and there's an unhealthy pursuit. And I think the media and the world out there wants us to fall into that trap of the unhealthy part. And I think we're here, man, to discuss. I love the topic of being visually impaired, because we are visual. Jesus says if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart,
you've already committed.
He didn't say touch or feel. He said look. Yeah. And that's because we're visual, Ralph, and I agree with you. Visually, we're being stimulated as soon as we get up.
Yeah.
Right.
As soon as we're 7 years old, 5 years old, we're visually stimulated. And in those spaces as well, in the gaming world, they're going after these kids. Right. In the sports world, they're going. In the arts. Right. I'm not in the space of the arts, but going this summer, going to Europe, I got a chance to just explore a little bit of there's a target in there too about sexuality in the arts. So I agree, man. I think the enemy's crafty. I think he's not the most smartest to come up with new things, but he's consistent.
He's consistent.
He knows what works and what doesn't work.
And you think about this. It's interesting you brought that verse up. That verse means a lot to me, because that was one of the things that verse broke the chains off my life when it came to porn. Because I had never thought of myself as an adulterer.
Right.
But if you've looked at a woman to lust after her, you've already, like Jesus is very clear, committed adultery in your heart, right? And that broke me, man, in a very, I was like, wow, wait a minute, man. Like, that's what I'm doing every single time I watch this, or I think about this, or or I share it with my friend. Is that really what Jesus like, yeah. Yeah, buddy. This is, and so I do think that, and that brought a specific reality to, like, here's what you're doing. Yeah, you are hurting your wife. She doesn't know, but you're hurting her. You're hurting your relationship with her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so
that look was for her.
That look was designed for her.
To delight, to amplify intimate. That was for her.
For her.
And the enemy has us looking all over the place, distracted.
Well, and to your point, I just want to jump in here real quick. I love what you said, because that look is for her. Mm-hmm. Now, that look is for her so that you can amplify your intimacy with her through marriage. Now, here's the thing, right? When we don't do that and we have all this baggage, right? We can be made free of that. We're going to get there to that. But when we don't, it hinders that. Yeah. Right. How many men are out there that have dealt with lust and pornography or whatever? Every man deals with this, right?
Right.
And so you enter into this marriage covenant, right? If you're married, and next thing you know, the great lie, right, is your marriage is going to take care of all of that. No, boy. No. Ain't happening,
That's
right?
a trap.
That's a trap, right? So here we are now, all this baggage from being targeted by culture, being targeted by the world, being targeted by the enemy.
Right.
And now we drag that into our marriage.
Right.
Right? When God intended, no, I want all of that energy for this.
Right.
And I think about sometimes, and you guys can disagree with me if you want, but I think about sometimes when in Jewish culture, when they would get married at 13, 14 years old, I think there was some wisdom to that, man.
Yeah.
Arranged marriage, 13, 14-year-old, two good families,
Right.
I'm thinking to myself with 4 kids now, man, that's not such a bad idea.
Right, yeah.
Right? But I love what you said, because that baggage that causes you to now be blocked from the full intimacy you should have with your wife.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up. As you were speaking, you have, what you bring into your marriage is what you've been trained that this is what it's supposed to look like.
Exactly.
And that's the danger when we look at, being exposed to certain things at a certain age. Like, it becomes like the enemy has taken what you've seen as the definition for what it will look like later.
Yep. Right. 100%.
Yeah.
And we have to learn, like, wait a minute. So it's almost like we have to define what healthy sexuality looks like as a man and as young men, right? So that we can go into our marriages and delight in the wife of our youth, as we were discussing.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I know when I talk to men about this and I tell them that you're being robbed of your reward.
That's good.
Right? They sit there and they think no man wants to be shorted, right? I don't want to be shorted of my reward, right? But the world never teaches us that, right? I have 2 boys at home. They're 8 and 5 now, and so this is consistently in my household,
right?
Where I don't want you robbed of your reward. There's a way for you to do this. There's a way for you to be able to harness God's blessing. And when a man can sit back and think to himself 2 things, because I really believe that there are 2 very important things just to help a man get free. Number 1 is that this wasn't their fault all the time.
Right.
Wasn't their fault all the time. If you're listening to this right now and you've gone through this and you didn't grow up in a household that taught you anything about sexual purity, didn't touch anything about following God, you need to shake that hook loose, right? I think sometimes when I go fishing and I throw out a rubber worm and I'm pulling, I love bass fishing. What's the first thing that bass tries to do when you get it hooked?
Spit it out of mouth.
Spit it out,
yeah.
Right? The enemy has a lot of men hooked.
Yeah.
And we need to spit out that hook and realize that we're not responsible for this.
Yeah.
That I was sucked in, I was never taught any otherwise, and that can create I've seen that create freedom for men where they finally let go and they go, okay, all right, I need to flush this because now I know better.
Right.
Now I can do better.
Right.
And the healer can heal.
Right.
He can heal you of that. And so that's number 1, right? We need to make sure that happens. And then number 2 is understanding that second point, that there is healing. There is wholeness on the other side of this when you begin to, because the power of following God and the blessing is so much greater than the deception.
Right.
Right.
It will overcome that deception. So be encouraged if you're listening to this.
Yeah.
Please, it will overcome that deception. You can find wholeness. And man, that's what I've seen.
Yeah. You know, you think about from the enemy's perspective, right? You think about, I think there is a play coming out, Screw Tape Letters.
Yeah.
Somewhere in Tampa. And I remember watching that where it's the perspective of the demon strategizing to trip you up, right? So think about the enemy's return on investment when he exposes you to sexuality as a young man. Like, it's like the return on investment is so great. He got you so early. You have a warped view of sexuality. You have a how would you say it, a false perspective on sexuality. So as a young man, I remember, like, what does that look like in marriage? You know, going into marriage, being married to my wife, my perspective on sexuality was so jacked up. You know, I fell into the trap, Tim, that once I got married, everything's going to fall into place.
Of course.
Everything's going to be perfect and we're going to figure this thing out. But that's not the case, you know. It's so much more. And the thing that I figured kind of got enlightened to was the world tells you that sex is just physical, and God says it's much more than that. It is physical, but it's spiritual as well.
100%.
You know, and that's the lie that some of us fall into, especially our young men, where it's just a physical act. We're just animals. You know, we're just going to go out there and get our satisfaction.
Keep the
we
race
got to keep it going.
I think so.
It's so much more, and that's the word you use. There's a blessing to it when you get it on the right umbrella, God's blessing to it. And it's created, I mean, sex is, it's a icing on the cake when it comes to marriage. You know, it's so much intentional to keep us bonded together and go forward. So yeah, there's definitely a battle.
Yeah.
And you think about it, it's like, think about the terms that you used when you have sex with multiple. Oh man, I bagged that.
It's this idea of conquering, right? You know what I mean? It's like I've added one to
it's like, hey, I bagged
a notch on the
It's
belt.
almost like, you know,
It's a conquest.
It's a conquest, but this is the carnage that you're leaving behind.
Right.
Yeah.
The brokenness, right? The Bible talks about knowing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm still getting to know my wife.
Yeah.
There's depths to my wife. After 30 plus years of marriage, there's still depths to her. I'm discovering and delighting in her. You know what I'm saying? And so, but you don't go into marriage thinking that, right?
Right.
You know, it's super transactional, and it's, you know, and so I think that we have to, as men, discover God's plan for it. You know, we were talking about this earlier, and I mean, I'm just really getting to the point of where I'm understanding so much more about what God has for marriage.
Oh man,
you know what I'm saying? And so, you know, my wife was created for me to delight in her. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like, hey, God, he brings Adam. Adam is following God's will. He brings the woman to Adam, and he's like, something to help her.
Yep.
Right.
As her
connecno. We talk about that a little bit, but she is his delight.
Yeah.
She's to surround him as suitable, someone that fits you. So when you're naming those animals, bro, you got somebody with you. When you're reigning and ruling, you have someone beside you. You do this together. And what I was sharing was there's two things. The Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. So rest. Like a lot of men just work themselves and we run to the. No, we just come out of the Sabbath. Our rest provides for us a way forward into the work that God has for us, and also to delight in our wives. So those are the two things. If I had to sit down with a man today, I'd be like, bro, delight in your wife. She's the wife of your youth, right? And find rest because the Sabbath was created for you. These are things God created for you.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I do. And I want to go deeper on that too, because I think it's important to understand. So, and this is where we get a little in the weeds of the Hebrew, but I love what you said about the complementation, right? The complementing, right? So God creates Adam as a full human being. And the Hebrew actually says this. If you go into the Old Testament, go into the Hebrew, he's a full human being. I mean, he's got all the emotional attributes of man, woman, everything, right? And then God says he's not good to be alone.
Right.
It wasn't the fact that he wasn't a whole person in totality. It was the fact that he was just alone.
Right.
So what did God do? He took out the rib. And in taking out the rib, if you go into the language, it actually begins to say that the rib signifies taking out attributes of Adam that he no longer now has.
Wow.
And then what did God do with the rib? He formed Eve.
Forms Eve, yeah.
So in God's equation, in the marriage equation of the world, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. 1 + 1 = 1. And this is what you're getting at, I think, right?
Yeah.
So the enemy tries to cheapen all of this, right? Make you feel as though that this doesn't exist, right? You're two individuals. No. You're actually now finally becoming incompleteness.
Right.
And I've seen it in my life. And I'm sure you guys have seen it in your marriage, right? Where all of a sudden it's like, man, when I'm lockstep with my wife,
buddy,
it's over. Parenting's easy. Everything just becomes more effective and easier. But it's not until I delight.
Right.
It's not until I delight with her until I get my truth about this.
Right.
And so God takes the rib, forms Eve, and now all of a sudden, what does Eve have? Eve has the attributes of womanhood, right? And what are women much better at than we are? Many things, right?
Name it.
You name it, right? But God gave Adam a certain amount of attributes so that there would be this wholeness and unity that we see.
Right.
Right? And when we treat it differently, when we treat it as a conquest, we are destroying women.
Right.
We are destroying them.
Yeah.
Right?
The carnage, bro.
And every man that's sitting there thinking to themselves, oh, wow, I never thought about that. Man, when I'm watching pornography, I'm destroying women. I'm lusting after women, destroying women. Think about the women you care about.
Yeah.
Think about your mom. Like, no, man.
Your sister.
And you're really hurting yourself.
And you're hurting yourself.
And you're hurting
it's
yourself.
A totality of destruction that's going on here.
Yeah. Because, like you said, she's part of you. She's one flesh. And sometimes we don't see it that way because we're so selfish. Like, it's what's in it for me, and that person's not changing, so I'm not going to change. I'm not going to work on it because she's not working on it. And I think that is a great formula for the enemy to do some big-time damage. And unfortunately, we give up, And one of the things that I look at is a lot of times the churches don't speak about this.
No. They don't, man.
Like some of our guys, like I'm thinking about some of the single men that are going to be hearing this podcast. It's like, how do I find the right person? Like, how do I find that person that's walking in the same direction as I'm going, that has the same values and all that? And I think sometimes as churches, man, we lack that. We don't help these guys or ladies. What are you looking for? How to approach that conversation. So that's definitely something to keep that in perspective.
I mean, let's lean into that because they're listening.
Yeah.
Right.
Go.
I mean, you're the question guy. So I mean, but like, what if you're single out there, right? What's a couple of ways to find the right person, right? Like, how do you find? I think the first thing is serving.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, I think find the right church, like
find the right environment to serve in.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
Right. And I do think because both should be serving the Lord. Now that's my first throw out there, like be in the right environment and serving.
Yep.
And you want someone who has that same heart for the Lord.
100%.
Like, is she serving the Lord? You get what I'm saying? Like, so many things align with Tracy and I when we got saved. When we got married, we wasn't no born again. Neither one of us were saved.
Yep.
But when we got saved and we started submitting ourselves to Jesus first,
Yeah.
we started to walk in step with each other. So I think if you're single out there, man, find a place to serve.
Yeah.
Find a healthy church to serve in. And look at those who are serving around you. What else would you say, Jerry? Like
Man, when I read the New Testament, Tim, Ralph, I don't see a lot of dating advice.
No.
There's just pictures of marriage.
Correct.
Right.
Like for me, Tony and I were married 10 years and then we got saved. Then we, Jesus, engulfed us, man, with his love and understanding who he is. But at the same time, I feel that there's no dating ways. There's a lot of pictures of marriage.
Sure.
Like I remember with my son, I remember we were building a Ferrari and Legos. And we couldn't figure that thing out. But what we saw was a picture on the cover that helped us a little bit.
Come on now.
So the New Testament gives you pictures of marriage of what it looks like. But on the dating part, on looking for that, there is just one verse that I found. And this is 1 Corinthians 7, verse 39. It says, marry someone who loves the Lord. That's it. That's the only dating advice that I found in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And some translation says, marry someone who is in the Lord.
Yeah.
To Pastor Ralph's encouragement here, it's like, where are you going to do that? In these environments where you see, not because someone's in a Bible study, not with someone who goes to church, but someone who loves the Lord. You're going to see that in this person's life where, to your point, what are we looking for? Does he dress nice? Does she dress nice? Does she take care of herself? No. Do you see her in prayer?
Yeah.
Do you see her serving? Do you see her, pursuing the Lord in that Bible study or that get together or that prayer time? You got to be seeing these things. These are evidence, this fruit of this person's relationship, and that's it. That's the only advice that the Apostle Paul gives you in the New Testament.
That's so good, bro.
Yep.
Because I've said this before. The greatest gift that you can give your wife or your spouse on your wedding night is a testimony that you have fallen in love with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me jump in here.
I love Jesus.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here as the guy who was saved before marriage.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to rewind back all the way to college, is where I met my wife. So my wife, native Floridian, and I had reached the time in my life of dating, if you will, where I'm just like, this is completely stupid. Why am I dating? This is foolish, right? And so I got saved in college, born and raised Catholic, but didn't really have a relationship with Christ individually until I got involved with Crusade, Campus Crusade for Christ on campus at college.
Cool.
And I remember coming out of a dating situation when I was just like, this is empty. What am I doing? This is totally dumb. And it was kind of God transforming me, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember, I never forget this. This is the advice I give single Christian men that are looking for a wife. Write down what you want.
The picture.
Write it down.
Yeah.
I said, you should be able to give me 4 or 5 things that you're looking for in your wife. And I
Right.
said, and number 1 and 2 should be their relationship with Jesus and what you're expecting out of them if they're going to go ahead and, depending on what you've gone through in your life. Now, my wife and I were blessed to grow up in families where waiting for marriage was important.
Right.
That's what we did. We did. And so number 1 for me was she had to be a Christian girl. Number 2, she had to be a virgin. Number 3, she had to come from a good family. Number 4, she had to be interested in things that I was interested in. A little bit of chemistry side of things, right? And then number 5, it had to be she wanted the same plans that I wanted to for our family going forward down the line, right?
Yeah.
So how do you get these 5 things out real quick? Well, God just sends you the right person. So the story is, which is interesting to me, is about a month after that, this girl who I saw playing softball, because I played baseball in college, was on the other field. And I'm like, I've never seen that girl before around here. Well, she transferred in.
Yeah.
She transferred in from a school up in Georgia that was a Christian school. And when we first met, she blew me off like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Which is solid, right?
That's solid.
That's good.
That's
She's
solid.
putting up these boundaries.
Yeah.
Now, I was frustrated at the time, but now I look back and I'm like, that was genius.
Yeah. Will he pursue me?
And long story short is our conversation in the very first night we met, she checked all those boxes.
That's good.
She showed up a month after I finally said enough. These are the 5 things that I'm looking for, right? But number 1 was what? Was she pursuing the Lord? Right? And that was my number 1. So if you're a man and you're a Christian man listening to this, write them down. It's the same advice I've given my brother. It's the same advice I've given men all throughout that I've mentored to say, hey, write them down and don't even bother with it unless in your first conversation with this person, you pretty much checked all the boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and even
16 years later and 4 kids,
there you go.
the formula
win.
worked really well.
The win.
Yeah, and
ahead,
even
Jerry.
if you don't pursue that perfectly, God will work with you.
Yeah.
You know, because it's
God
like,
is gracious, bro.
yeah, it's not so much about, you know, finding the right person, but about becoming the right person.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. They will see what God is up to. They will see the spouse that God has for you. But when we're jacked up over here, our hearts are, it's foggy, it's confusing. It's like we're all over the place.
Yeah.
We're not focused. We're not in alignment with what God wants for us. So what happens is we get desperate, and whatever comes our way, we're like, is that it? Is that it?
Right. Yeah.
But I love that you are setting a target. You're setting an expectation.
Right. Yep.
You know, we just reshot the premarital videos for next year for our church, and they asked me to do the one on, guess what? Sexuality.
Yeah.
So we were. I used a passage of the lady at the well that meets Jesus, the Samaritan woman, where, you know, she had 5 marriages. She's living with a guy. That's number 6. And then she meets Jesus, is number 7. And he completes
man, that's
her.
good.
You know what I'm saying? It's
That's
like,
so good.
you
Good.
need me, lady, because everything you've been doing doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you need me. I'm going to complete that. And I think having a focus, having a target is so important.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Because
agree, and I'll
you
say
need
a
it.
couple things to that. You
Right.
know, that's what amazes me about that story too is the idea of marriage is so incredibly important in Scripture, unbelievably important to God. Right? You can start peeling back some of these layers of. You know, the bitter water test, right? And we're not going to have time to get into all this, right? But if you go research this, basically, it's the only time that God would allow his name to be erased. His name in the Old Testament could never be erased from anything, his name. But when it came to the bitter water test, whether or not a marriage would survive, he allowed it to be erased because it was that important to him. That's number one. Number two, about the story about the woman at the well. I'm consistently amazed always by that story because that was the first time Jesus actually revealed himself as Messiah to anybody.
Yeah.
To a woman, a Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
Half Jewish, half Gentile, right? So he's forecasting he's going to bridge the gap, but more importantly, to make that woman whole.
Yeah.
Right.
And to allow her to actually understand what it means to be in that full, abundant life.
Right.
That, hey, you've been going in this wrong direction forever. And so that's what I want to pivot a little bit here to. What does that look like as far
See,
as
that's-
redemption, man?
There you go.
If you're listening to this and you've done it wrong, we've been hitting on all these points.
Right.
You may feel as though, yes, I've been deceived. Yes, I've been down the wrong road. Well, it's never too late.
Right.
He has an abundant life for you. And
Yeah.
how do we do that? How do we go ahead and get there, Ralph?
Well, you know, and I got chills when you were talking about that, Jerry and Tim, because God is the God of redemption. And so when you read your Bible, a lot of times you're like, man, that's not us. That's not the marriage I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like my marriage doesn't look like one.
Yeah.
Right. And so as he's, you know, just let's stay with the woman at the well. He shows up as number 7. Really, he needed to be number 1. He's like, man, if you could just start with me. And that's what I would tell every man, every woman that's watching this. Like, man, maybe you're on the verge of divorce. Maybe you've been trying to live this Christian life and you're like, man, you know, I've tried religion, I've gone to churches, I've been through counseling. Man, is it any way that you can just sit down and bring Jesus to the forefront in your personal life,
Yeah.
in your heart, before you ask it of your wife, before you ask it of your spouse or your husband, bring Jesus to the forefront. And I think redemption starts there because he begins to redeem you.
Amen.
Right? He begins to start to do a work in you. You know, and it is interesting to me how many times we even in marriage, man, sometimes you did this to me, and so now I'm going to do this to you. And it's like, no, you know what a covenant is? Even when you won't, I will.
Yeah. Right. The original covenant.
Even when you don't, I will. I'm going to do my part of this. And there's something that happens. I remember reading in Ephesians. I'm sorry, I know let's wrap this up, Ralph. Come on.
You're good.
Ephesians, in Ephesians, you know, it calls us to, it talks about the aroma of Christ in Ephesians 5. The sacrifice of Christ.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, I'm reading that verse and I got old Bibles with it highlighted and I'm like, God, help me do this. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Bro, the only reason why we're sitting here talking about we're Christians is because someone loved us enough to give his life for us.
Yeah, that's right.
That's it. There's nothing that we bow our knee every time because we're like, Greater love has no one to just lay down their
makes
life for their
sense.
friends.
Yeah.
Like, what does it look like for a man to lay down his life?
Yeah.
Man, can your wife see you laying down your life? Because there's an aroma that comes from that.
It's so true.
That she's designed to smell and to be drawn to.
Respond to it.
She's going to respond to that.
Yep.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's just dying to ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Dying to the golf game for a while.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dying to the heart. Oh, look at what I do around here. You better. Let's die to that for a minute, bro.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's give up our lives. Let's love Jesus. Let's fall in love with him and allow him to redeem our story. It starts with us.
Right.
And in my experience, there's something that happens to my bride when she sees me dying to myself.
It's true.
When she sees humility and the pride goes out the door and I stop bragging about how great I am and just humble myself before the Lord. And I can remember times where she says, hey, we were arguing. Where was that Ralph? The one that's showing up right now?
Right.
Like, can we get more of him?
Right.
Because you were so easy to talk to just now. And I'm like, yeah, I was spending time with Jesus, man. He broke me down and showed me myself. And I think that's the key, man. Like,
Right.
I think if you're going to, the story's only redeemed when he shows up in your life and in your heart.
I got 100% agree with you, Ralph. I've worked with many men who are sleeping on the couch, right? Marriage is in shambles. They're struggling. And I remember one specifically that was just phenomenal. He came to our courageous group broken, and we sat down, and it took him like a time or two to finally open up. And he's just like, my marriage is just falling apart.
Yeah.
I'm on the couch, and we put him down that road.
Yeah.
And it was funny because when the ego went down,
Yeah.
when humility came in, the word's true. The humble will be exalted, and exalted will, it works in your marriage.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
When one of the great things that I learned, and I try to do this over and over again, is when there is angst or there's conflict in my marriage, I will be the first to go. I don't care if I'm wrong. I don't care if I'm right.
Yeah.
Numerous times when my wife's in bed or I sit on the side of the bed and I'll say, I am sorry.
Yeah.
She could be completely in the wrong. Completely in the wrong. And there have been numerous times biblically she's completely in the wrong. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter. Yeah.
If I'm the leader
Yeah.
of the home and that has been given to me by God's authority to lead, then I should be leading not only in every area of the home, but I should be leading when it comes to reconciliation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is part of this redemption process, right? I need to lead myself. If I've struggled with this, if I've struggled with being exposed to pornography at a young age, which I was, how do I got to lead myself in that redemption, right? And the great part about it is I don't do it in my own strength.
Right.
Leading myself in redemption oftentimes is just inviting the Holy Spirit to do his work.
Right.
Right.
And next thing you know, he gets your identity.
Right.
Hey, your identity is not to lust, it's to protect.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, he starts wrecking you. You guys have probably gone through this. He starts wrecking you mentally. And then once you get this fixed between your ears, the game's over.
Yeah.
Because now the truth comes in, your thinking becomes right, and all of a sudden the abundance comes.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, man, everything's getting better around me because humility and submission to him and just relying on the power of the Holy Spirit is how it gets done, not relying on my own abilities.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of times our wives or spouses have a hesitation to submit or surrender to your leadership because of the way you're leading that. Like
100%.
She's created to surrender to your leadership if you're surrendered to Jesus. You know what I'm saying? And we don't know. We don't always work that perfectly, but if you're pursuing that surrender to Jesus, I think everything else is going to fall into place.
Yeah.
You know, and to your point, Tim, we can't do that perfectly. But if she sees a humbled guy who loves those words, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, this is where I'm at.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm going forward. I think she's going to see that and be able to say, you know what? I'm going to follow my man. I'm going to follow my husband. I'm going to follow his direction.
Right.
Yep.
But it's our selfishness that won't get to that place. So
right.
we got to work on that. Whenever I get a couple in front of me who is having marital issues, I ask the guy, it's like, how is this for you? And I see it. I see the dysfunction of it, and they just don't know how to get back to that place. So we got to keep encouraging that.
Yep.
So as we wrap up, one more thing I wanted to hit before we go ahead and close this one out, guys, is let's talk about the perspective of this cultural sexuality, this deception. How does it affect our wives and our marriage? We talked about it a little bit, right? But let's step back, because I think sometimes we're so centered, focused, right? We're so, we're being attacked, we're being how do we protect our wives from this? Because it looks different, right? We're visually motivated, right? And so the enemy just go ahead and throws up a billboard as you're going down the highway, right? Or, throw something in your algorithm on social media. What do you guys think about how we can do a good job? Because our wives still fight this. I still see this, right? And I got an 11-year-old daughter. I got kids that are going to be coming into this battlefield that are already in it, right? But I get to protect them a little bit. How do we do this better? What are our wives subject to? What do you guys think about?
Well, I think us having awareness of what they're being bombarded with. Like, our culture tells our wives how to think, how to dress, how to look. I mean, whenever they look in the mirror, there's something missing. They have a filter on them like says, there's something wrong with me. I don't look like the world says I ought to look. And I think for us as husbands to come alongside and say, and I don't do this perfectly, but hey, you look beautiful today. Hey, that color looks great on you. Just having an awareness of where she is at.
So good, Jerry.
She's in a battlefield where, and I'm telling you, I'm not perfect at this.
Right.
But there's times where, man, I'm doing pretty good in this area. And that's where, man, I haven't really said anything at all. And I know she's missing that. So, yes, we can't stop that cultural targeting that.
Correct.
Right.
But what we can do is respond to it in such a way that it's going to uplift her and know that she is safe, she's secure, and she is loved. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
it's like
100%.
As men, we got to be crafty and learn of what that looks like, whether it's, the things that you tell her, the things that she feels. I think First Peter says, live with your wife in an understanding way. So what does that mean to understand? What ticks her? What motivates her? What inspires her? We need to pursue that, guys. And I think that's the start on that.
So I'll just jump in real quick on that because what's interesting is, our role as protector fits right into that, right? But when you look deeper actually into that word shamar, there's an understanding in Hebrew that it actually is about building a protective layer, right? Or building a shelter, right? And that's what we're to do as men for our wives. Build a shelter over them. And you said one of the most important words, I think, that I've ever dealt with, especially and with even with my daughters, right? But with my wife, the word beautiful. Right? There's a great book written years ago called Captivating, I think it was.
Stacey Eldridge.
She did a great job right alongside John, right? Because he wrote Wild at Heart. And it's that understanding that your wives are really just looking to have the affirmation of whatever man is in their life. Used to be their dad, now it's you. And they just want to know that they're beautiful.
Can you say that one more time? It used to be their dad.
Used to be their dad, right? And now it's you.
You're not their dad.
You're not. Right. You're actually on the next level of importance. Right? You are it. You are the leader. You're the person that is guiding her down the road of her relationship with God, but also her security. Right? And this is one thing that burdens me tremendously with an 11-year-old daughter, man, and a 2-year-old daughter is they're going to know that their dad thinks they're beautiful. A couple different reasons why, because I want them to be secure, but I don't want them to have any hesitancy when they go out and they start looking for their husband. Because they better get the same messaging that I'm giving. That makes sense?
That's so good. Jerry, you said safety, security, and love. It's interesting that sometimes we put love as the first thing, and obviously safety and security is wrapped up in that, right? But the continuation of that First Peter verse, dwell with your wife in an understanding way, as co-heirs of the grace of life.
Oneness. 1 + 1 = 1.
Co-heirs.
And I tell you, that's a verse that as husbands, bro, you need to memorize that.
You need to know that one, bro.
Here, ready for this? Because there is a purpose in the pursuit, right? Live with your wife. Why? So that your prayers may not be hindered. Guys, if you're praying for that career, if you're praying for that blessing upon your life, if you're praying and they're not being answered, you need to serve your wife.
Because it affects your prayer life.
Yes, and I think God raises that of such importance. This is important to me, guys. God is saying to us men, because I'm gonna give you favor when that's working. When you're pursuing your wife that way, favor is gonna come upon your life.
100%.
And guys,
she is our favor.
That's it.
Absolutely.
She is our favor.
Yes.
You get what I'm saying? And it's rewiring your mind to understand what God's word says about this. And it just hit me. We get a lot of our advice from Paul, who wasn't married.
It's wild.
But Peter shows up, who was married. We know he was married because Jesus healed his mother-in-law.
Got it.
And Peter's like, dwell with your wife in the understanding of what he says, co-heirs of the grace of life, so that your prayers won't be hindered. Yeah. I think Peter might have had some
Peter had some wisdom.
Prayers.
Oh,
yes,
I'm
sir.
sure
so he's like, at the end of my life, let me pour into you married men.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And let you know how to run this race, right? And so I think, when you talk about how things affect our wives, it does, man. Like, and my wife has this thing, she calls it, as we counsel couples and stuff, the third person. Porn is the third person. Mm-hmm. The girl at your job that you find that you just kind of like hanging out, she's the third person. And she begins to take a part of you away from the oneness that you have with your spouse.
Yep.
Like you're one, like guys are wondering, oh man, why are you going through my phone? She knows.
Yeah.
She knows you're not all there, bro.
Mm-hmm.
She knows there's something, can't put a finger on it.
Yeah.
There's something going on here.
Yeah.
And so how do you protect them is being aware as that joke at the water cooler with so-and-so, it's not cool.
Yeah.
I gotta cut that off because I'm enjoying the beer. I laugh a little too much when I'm with you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I'm enjoying your company a little too much.
We're going to have some boundaries talking maybe on one of our future podcasts.
So like as men, the way that we protect our wives is protect ourselves because we're one with them.
Yeah.
They're affected, bro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're one with them. And if we can drive that point home, co-heirs, oneness. It's the only relationship on the face of the earth that represents Christ in the church. Right. That's the end goal.
Yeah.
When people see you two together, do they see unmerited favor?
Yep.
Grace. And do they see grace, mercy, and love?
So true.
That's how we represent
best evangelism
Christ in the church.
tool
I'm
out
sorry,
there.
I got a little excited.
No, you're good. But it is the best evangelism tool out there.
Yeah.
And I think Paul, in his wording in Ephesians, and we've read this before, love your wife as Christ loved the church. I remember as I would say fairly new believer, I got saved in a small church, and the pastor said that. I said, you don't know my wife. That's what came into my mind. I'm like,
the enemy was like, here you go, bro. Let me put that in your brain.
How?
Like, do you really know my wife?
Yeah, I'm like, bro, time out.
Yeah.
And as you pursue Jesus,
so
right? As you pursue Jesus, you understand the gospel. You understand that marriage is part of, when you look at the gospel, and and Jesus is our groom and we're the bride, that marriage encompasses salvation.
Yeah.
You see the components of all that. And I remember when I heard that in Ephesians, it was like, man, I'm not understanding that.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by that.
Years.
I'm like, man, my wife, we're not there yet, man. You don't know my wife. And then it says, and wives, respect your husbands.
Yes.
Yep.
So God is telling us to do two things that we're not good at. But with him, you will be.
You can be.
You know what I'm saying? And for a guy, for me, love your wife, I thought it was 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's 3 minutes. I loved her. I'm good.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. And for her, respect, it doesn't come easy to her.
No.
So God is telling the wife to respect her husband. Hey, keep that, not love a husband, nurturing love, that's part of who she is, but respect, it's hard for them. So they have to learn how to do that. And man, I tell you what, when your wife does respect you, let her know, I love the way you did that.
Yeah.
I love the way you
Positive
affirmed me.
reinforcement. Yep.
Yeah, and I think they're not, mind readers. They need to know what that looks like. So keep working on that.
That's good.
Well, gentlemen, we could just keep going, and I think we can, but we're going to wrap this one up, man. So
we need some questions and stuff, though.
We do.
And
like,
drop it on the chat.
Subscribe, drop your questions on the chat. Any future episode you guys want us to tackle, we'll tackle. I have no problem saying that. Yeah. And we're going to keep track of all of these things, and we appreciate you guys tuning in. Just to recap real quick, listen, you are targeted men. You are, and understand that. And understand that you're a victim here. And that, but you've been created to be a victor in Christ, and so you have the tools to be able to do that. You can be redeemed from this if you didn't do it well. There's nothing that God can't redeem. Get around a group of men that can help you get redeemed. And number 3, guys, make sure that you understand how this has an effect on your marriage. Be your wife's protector, and know that she needs to hear every single day that she's beautiful. So appreciate you guys tuning into the Altered Manhood Podcast. Until next time,
live an altered life, baby.
We out.
Yeah. Peace.